we've talked about the retail opportunities and challenges from a retail perspective, but as a business perspective, looking at opening up new markets and taking your business to ASEAN region or anywhere, I want to sort of get your views on the kind of the business considerations, like what's the tax and customs considerations, the legal background that you have to do. I mean, obviously, I'm sure that DIT helps businesses and advises in that area, but I don't know. Maybe Andy, if you could give us a flavour of sort of operating, or your advice to a UK business looking to set up the fundamentals, i.e., registering a business and the tax and all those sort of important aspects of setting up a business.
Again, my experience would purely be on Malaysia in that respect, and it's not too tricky. Before, I think a number of years behind, further back, it was more complex, and there were sort of ratios of foreign ownership, and you had to have far greater local involvement in businesses. I think that has relaxed a lot. I think the difficulties are more, to be honest with you, I hear that it is quite tough getting into Indonesia. There's a lot of changes. It's a bit like India in that regard. Perhaps there's a lot of chopping and changing, and no one's quite clear that everything's going to stay particularly same one week to the next. So I think Malaysia is much more stable in that regard. Obviously, Singapore is one of the easiest countries in the world to do business in. I think it ranks number one in that regard virtually every year. So Singapore for sure is easy to get into. And the problem is the cost of doing business there is astronomical. And I think that again harks back to the issue that, when Lee said maybe they're thinking of Malaysia first, I think, Singapore actually is on the verge of technically a recession. In terms of the business environment there, if we're able to talk a little bit about that, I think there are serious concerns about the cost of doing business there, the cost of labour, the cost of the operational overheads. Yes, rents are starting to come down. I think landlords have finally, the sort of pennies dropped, and they're realising that they cannot sustain those sort of historically high levels. But it's not fast enough for a number of brands who are really struggling. So I still think that actually, in terms of our immediate area where we are here in Malaysia, Thailand on our northern border, Singapore on our southern border, I think actually Malaysia does make perfect sense. We have a number of serious socio-economic, political problems ourselves here right now. I'm not going to kid anybody. We have the mother of all corruption scandals right on our doorstep right now. It's been ongoing for the past year. I don't see any particular resolution to that issue probably until the next general election, which is scheduled for 2018. That depends on whether we actually have an election, because there's a lot of issues here which might actually impact on the current incumbent government actually not being able to hold it, short of a lot of people going to jail. So those issues aside, Malaysia, it sounds very scary, but this whole region has, Thailand has historically lots of political problems, and yet retail still just manages to forge ahead. And I think if I was a British brand, I wouldn't be put off necessarily by reading too many of the stories that you do read about the political situations in any of the particular countries in this region. But be cognizant that the economy is not doing particularly well. It's not doing as well as it was 2 years ago. The drop in oil prices clearly had a massive impact on particularly in Malaysia, where there's been a huge emphasis on relying on petroleum and oil products. So all these things factored in, it's not a particularly rosy picture. That being said, I think there's opportunity and adversity. And I think in Malaysia, again, there's a glut of commercial retail space. So there really are very good opportunities to get good deals right now on the table. But you have to be careful that you get a good deal that actually, there are shoppers who are still going to come to the mall in question and shop there. So that's the challenge. Yes, I think in Malaysia and Singapore there are better chances of getting deals now than there were 12 months ago even. But are the shoppers spending less? And the answer simply is they are not spending as much as they were. And tourism numbers have dropped, especially from mainland China, Indonesia, as well, into Singapore and KL. So there's a lot of these things that need to be, just being borne in mind, that it's not just the land of milk and honey. There are issues, as there would be anywhere. But I don't think it's enough to scare people off or brands off from making that jump and considering getting involved in the market.
Thanks very much, Andy. So, Lee, your checklist when you're looking at a new market, I mean, you've heard what Andy was saying there. I mean, how high up the list of your checklist are those infrastructure issues and
I think
legal and tax and customs?
I think for us it starts really from the fact that we, as a business, are not necessarily looking to go and set up ourselves as a business in the country. So our model is still very much franchise. So that in itself puts more of the emphasis onto the local partner to be, that's part of what they bring to the table, is that established business and an infrastructure that's already in place. But even despite that, I think we would go through a very simple red, amber, green checklist along the lines of economic, social, political criteria, and rank countries then based on that. But hey, you're talking to someone who's got stores in Libya, so I think those criteria are obviously important and they will steer us in a certain direction. But come back to that point. But for us, it's really about that local partner. And if you've got someone who's determined and driven and has got that local resource and influence, they can turn an average market into a very good market. And similarly, you can give a fantastic market to a not such strong partner and really struggle. So what we tend to do more is work with our partners on very basic P&Ls. So we would do exactly the same for any of the Malaysian and or other Asian businesses that we look at. And to be frank, you also need to be big enough to put your hands up and at certain times say, do you know what, it's not quite for us at the moment. The duty structure, the tariff structure, the cost of goods into the country, it's not quite ready for us yet. Or we need to go away, sharpen our pencil, and look at ways of making ourselves more attractive as well for the market. Yep. So there are lots of checks and balances that we do on that journey from identifying a market to actually launching. And I do think it is very important that you also have the resolve, as Fred has said, to stick with some of those challenges, but also be big enough just to say either we need to change and do things this way, or let's just take a deep breath and revisit in 3 or 6 months.
Yeah.